The galaxy was vast and filled with countless species, each one unique and powerful in its own way, but none struck fear quite like the alien woman. She wasn't large or imposing her frame. If anything, was slender, almost fragile, but there was something about her that sent shivers down the spine of even the bravest warriors. No one knew her real name. She was only spoken of in hushed tones, called a menace, a walking catastrophe. Whispers of her past spread across star systems like wildfire, stories of entire fleets crumbling under the weight of her gaze, of minds breaking after a single interaction with her. She was an enigma, and everyone kept their distance. Locked away on a remote planet, far from the core systems, the alien woman was watched constantly by advanced surveillance systems and guarded by an elite force. But her true prison wasn't the walls or the guards, it was the collective fear that had shackled her to this isolated existence. The galactic governments didn't dare get too close, didn't dare provoke whatever terrifying abilities she might unleash. She was a weapon, some said, a force of nature. Others believed she was merely a warning of something worse to come. Either way, she was left alone, unwanted, and unapproachable. The galaxy was content with this arrangement: keep her contained, keep her far away. But rumors had begun to swirl, rumors about a human. In the vast expanse of space, humanity was still relatively new, only recently becoming a noticeable player on the galactic stage. Yet there was something about them that unsettled the older, more advanced species. Humans were strange, unpredictable, and above all, fearless. This human in particular had garnered attention. He had no title, no accolades, but his reputation spread like a wildfire: a strategist, a soldier, a thinker. And he was the only one willing to approach the alien woman. The alien woman had heard the whispers. They reached her even in her isolation. At first, she dismissed them as nothing more than another futile attempt to control her. But as time passed, she grew curious. A human? Fearless? She had seen many brave warriors reduced to trembling children in her presence. What made this one different? Her thoughts kept drifting back to the idea of a human coming for her, not with weapons or technology, but with something else. She wasn't sure what, but something about this intrigued her. She hadn't felt intrigue in a long time. The decision had been made. The human would go to her. Not to kill or imprison, she was already imprisoned, but to assess, to understand. The galactic powers couldn't agree on what should be done with her, so they sent someone who didn't play by their rules, someone with fresh eyes. As the human prepared for the mission, those in charge watched nervously. They were sending him into the unknown, into the heart of fear itself. But for him, it was just another challenge. He had faced worse, or so he thought. When the human arrived at the isolated planet, the tension was thick. Guards were stationed around the perimeter, their hands twitching near their weapons. They had been instructed to avoid direct contact, to let the human proceed alone. No one wanted to be near her, not even the most hardened soldiers. The human, however, walked forward without hesitation, his steps calm, deliberate. He had no reason to fear her. He had read the reports, heard the stories. None of it fazed him. Inside her containment, the alien woman waited. She could sense his approach, feel the energy that came with him. It was different from what she was used to. There was no trembling fear, no hesitation. This one moved with purpose, with certainty. She allowed herself a flicker of curiosity. She had broken stronger beings before. What made this human think he would be any different? The door opened, and the human stepped inside. He didn't falter, didn't show the slightest hint of fear. His eyes, though unseen by her, met her own. For the first time in years, someone was standing before her who didn't quake in terror. She felt a strange emotion stirring within her, something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. It wasn't quite hope, but it was something close to it. "Hello," the human said, his voice steady, almost casual. She didn't respond immediately. She was testing him, watching for the moment when the fear would break through. But it didn't. He stood there, waiting, patient. She tilted her head slightly, intrigued. Perhaps this one was different after all. "You're not afraid," she finally said, her voice quiet but carrying weight. "No," the human replied, should I be a long silence stretched between them. She wasn't used to this calmness, this lack of fear. She had expected him to falter, to hesitate. Instead, he just stood there, waiting, as if he had all the time in the galaxy. And in that moment, she realized that maybe this human was the one person who saw her for something more than the monster the galaxy believed her to be. The human entered the alien woman's domain, a small, cold room that reeked of sterility and isolation. The walls were bare, metallic, and devoid of life, much like the rest of the station. No decorations, no distractions, just a prison of endless silence. She sat on a simple chair in the middle, her form still and composed, as if waiting for him. Her eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light, were locked on him the moment he stepped inside, but he didn't flinch. He moved toward her without a word, his presence alone breaking the heavy, oppressive air that had long filled the room. No hesitation. No trepidation. The human seemed unaffected by her aura, the one that had sent countless others fleeing in terror or driven them to madness. This intrigued her. It wasn't that he didn't acknowledge her power. She could see in the way he moved that he was aware. Very aware, but he didn't cower. He treated her like a puzzle to be solved, not a threat to be avoided. "You've come," she said, her voice resonating in the cold silence. It was more of a statement than a question. Her words carried a weight that seemed to hang in the air for a long moment after she spoke. "I have," he replied simply, stopping a few feet in front of her. His voice, calm and deliberate, contrasted sharply with the atmosphere that had kept her in isolation for so long. He wasn't here to interrogate her, nor to fear her, but to understand her. She could feel it. She could feel it. She studied him carefully. He was different, unlike the others who had come before him. The soldiers, the scientists, the diplomats, they had all trembled in her presence, even if they tried to hide it. But this human, his mind seemed shielded. Not in fear, but in resilience. Her attempts to probe deeper were met with a quiet, unwavering strength. It was as if he had built walls within himself, not to shut out the world, but to maintain control over it. She leaned back in her chair, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "You think you're different from them?" He raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I don't think it." "I know it." The alien woman's lips tightened slightly, a flicker of amusement crossing her otherwise expressionless face. His confidence was intriguing, almost refreshing. Others had tried to convince her of their bravery, but she always saw through their lies. This human wasn't trying to prove anything, and that was what made him stand out. He didn't need to prove his fearlessness. It simply was. She shifted in her seat, leaning forward now, her glowing gaze locked onto him. "Do you know what they say about me?" she asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper, but laced with an undercurrent of threat. "I do," he replied, his expression unchanged. "But I'm here to hear it from you." For a moment, there was silence. She had expected him to stumble over his words, to fumble as so many others had when faced with her power. But no, he didn't waver. Instead, he stood his ground, waiting for her response. It was a challenge, though not overt. He was inviting her to tell her story, to drop the pretense of fear and destruction, and to speak the truth. She tilted her head, considering him. "And if I told you, would you believe me? That depends on what you say again." The amusement flickered across her face, though it was brief, a ghost of an expression. He was playing her game, but on his terms, not hers. She could sense it now. The strength he had wasn't physical, but mental, emotional. His mind was a fortress, and she wasn't sure she could break it, or if she even wanted to. "They fear me," she said, her voice now a little stronger. "Because they don't understand me. They never have. They fear what they can't control." The human responded, taking a step closer. "And they don't control you." Her eyes widened slightly at his words. It was true, of course. The galaxy had tried to contain her, to keep her powers sealed away, but no one had ever succeeded in truly understanding her. They saw only the destruction she was capable of, the raw, unfathomable power that radiated from her. No one had ever bothered to look deeper. Until now. "They think I'm a monster," she said softly, the edge of bitterness creeping into her voice. "They think I can destroy them with a thought." "And can you?" The question hung in the air, heavier than anything else they had exchanged so far. She could feel his gaze, steady and unblinking, waiting for her answer. Most would have asked in fear, but he was asking out of curiosity. He wasn't afraid of the answer. "I could," she replied after a pause, her voice soft but full of truth. "But I don't." He nodded, as though he had expected her answer. "That's why they're afraid of you. Not because of what you've done, but because of what you could do." The alien woman's gaze softened slightly. He understood. Finally, someone understood. It wasn't her actions that terrified the galaxy, it was the potential, the unknown. The fact that she had the power to destroy, even if she never intended to use it. That was the real source of their fear. "And you?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Why aren't you afraid?" The human didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her, his eyes searching for something. "Because fear doesn't solve anything. Fear keeps people from seeing the truth." She looked at him for a long time, processing his words. He was different, truly different. And for the first time in years, she felt something stir within her. It wasn't fear. And it wasn't anger. It was hope. Perhaps there was someone in the galaxy who could see her for who she truly was, not just the weapon they had all made her out to be. "Tell me," she said, leaning forward. "What is it you want from me?" He smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile of understanding. "I want to know your story." The real one. She hesitated, unsure whether to trust him. But as she looked into his unwavering eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in a very long time, someone who wasn't looking for a weapon or a monster. He was looking for a person. And for the first time in years, she decided to let him. For a long moment, the alien woman remained silent, her glowing eyes locked on the human. No one had ever asked for her story before. Everyone assumed they already knew it, or they were too afraid to hear it. But this human, he wasn't like the others. He had come not to judge, but to understand. There was a flicker of something in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. Perhaps it was trust, or at least the beginning of it. "You really want to know?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. The human nodded. "I do." She took a slow breath, the weight of her past pressing down on her. It was painful, but something in his steady gaze told her that he could handle it. He wouldn't turn away. He wouldn't cower like the others. She had no reason to believe him, but deep down she wanted to. "I come from a race you've probably never heard of," she began, her voice soft but steady. "We were powerful once. Our minds, our abilities were far beyond what most species could comprehend. We had the power to manipulate energy, to influence thoughts, to create and destroy with a single command. But with that power came responsibility, and not all of us handled it well. She paused, as if waiting for the human to react. He didn't. He just listened, quietly, his expression unreadable. There was a time when we used our abilities to build, to help others. We were seen as wise, even benevolent. But then, things changed. We became divided. Some of us believed we should rule over the galaxy, that our power gave us the right to control others. Others, like myself, believed that power should be used sparingly, for the greater good. The conflict grew, and eventually, it became a war. She clenched her fists, her eyes glowing a little brighter. I fought for peace. I tried to stop the war before it consumed us all, but I failed. In the end, our civilization was torn apart, destroyed from within. Those who sought power were defeated, but at a terrible cost. My people were scattered, and I was blamed for what happened. Blamed. The human asked, his voice calm but probing. She nodded, her gaze distant, as if lost in the memories. The survivors saw me as a threat. They feared that I had the same ambition as the ones who had sought to dominate. They believed I was too powerful to be trusted. So they exiled me, sent me to this place to live out my days in isolation. The human remained silent, absorbing her words. His expression was thoughtful, but there was no judgment in his eyes. I've been here ever since, she continued, her voice tinged with bitterness. The galaxy hears rumors of my power, of what I'm capable of, and they fear me. They've never tried to understand. They only see the potential for destruction. They don't see me. The human took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. But you didn't destroy them. You didn't become what they feared. No, she said quietly. I didn't. But that didn't matter. They were too afraid of what I could do. They didn't care what I had done. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of her story hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. The human understood now why the galaxy feared her. It wasn't because of anything she had done, but because of what she represented. She was a reminder of power unchecked, of what could happen if someone like her ever lost control. But he also saw something else, something the galaxy had failed to see. She was still here, still standing, and she hadn't used her power to destroy. She had chosen restraint, even in the face of fear and isolation. And that, more than anything, spoke to her true character. You're not the monster they think you are, the human said softly, his voice filled with certainty. She looked up at him, her eyes glowing faintly. You don't know that. You've only just met me. I've seen enough, he replied, his tone firm. You could have destroyed me the moment I walked in. You could have lashed out at the galaxy that exiled you. But you didn't. That says more about you than the rumors ever could. She wanted to believe him. For so long she had been told that she was dangerous, that she was a threat. The galaxy had painted her as a villain, and after years of isolation she had begun to believe it. But now, standing here in front of this human, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: hope. You think you can change the way the galaxy sees me? She asked, her voice laced with doubt. The human nodded. I do. But it won't be easy. Why would you even try? What do you gain from this? He smiled, just a small, faint curve of his lips. Because I believe in second chances. And I believe that fear shouldn't define someone's future. She stared at him, unsure whether to trust his words. The galaxy had always been quick to judge, quick to condemn. Could he really change that? Could one human make a difference in a universe ruled by fear? What do you suggest? She asked cautiously. The human's expression became serious, his mind already working through the possibilities. We need to show them the truth. We need to gather evidence. Find those who still remember your past and are willing to speak out. We'll need to break through the lies and the fear. It won't be easy, but I think it can be done. She hesitated, her heart racing. It was a dangerous plan. If they failed, the galaxy would turn on her and on him. But something about his calm confidence made her want to believe him. He wasn't afraid of the consequences. He was willing to take the risk. "And if you're wrong," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The human's gaze didn't falter. "Then we'll face that together." She looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of doubt, but there was none. He meant every word. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of something other than fear and resentment. It was hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had thought. "All right," she said softly. "I'll trust you." The human nodded, his expression resolute. "Then let's begin." The plan was set in motion quickly. The human worked tirelessly, contacting key figures across the galaxy, old allies, former diplomats, even some who had once been involved in the conflict that led to the alien woman's exile. Each step was delicate, every conversation had to be handled with care. One misstep, and the fragile trust they were building could collapse under the weight of centuries-old fear and suspicion. The alien woman, for her part, watched as the human orchestrated the plan. She had never seen anyone work with such calm, such unwavering determination. His mind moved like a well-oiled machine, anticipating obstacles, adjusting tactics as needed. He wasn't just acting out of bravery, he was methodical, careful. This was no reckless gamble. He was playing a long game, one that required patience and precision. Word by word, conversation by conversation, the truth about the alien woman began to spread. Small at first, barely a whisper, but it gained momentum. The human spoke to those who had known her before the war, those who remembered her as a protector, not a monster. Slowly, some began to listen. Skepticism lingered, of course, but there was a shift, a glimmer of doubt in the long-held fear that had gripped the galaxy for so long. But as the plan progressed, it didn't go unnoticed. Those who had profited from her isolation, those who had built their power on the foundation of fear, began to stir. They saw the humans' actions as a threat, not just to their control over the galaxy, but to the fragile balance they had maintained by keeping her locked away. If the truth came out, if she were freed, their hold over the galaxy's security would weaken. And that was something they couldn't allow. Resistance began to mount. First, it was subtle smear campaigns, whispers questioning the human's motives, trying to undermine his credibility. But he anticipated it. He countered with facts, with evidence, carefully releasing key information that couldn't be denied. His strategic mind saw every move before it was made, and he stayed one step ahead. But soon, the opposition became more direct. Powerful factions, threatened by the growing support for the alien woman, began to act. They attempted to discredit the human publicly, framing him as a reckless fool who was playing with forces beyond his understanding. They warned that if she were released, chaos would follow, and they spread rumors that he was being manipulated by her powers, that he was no longer in control of his own mind. The alien woman watched with a heavy heart. She had expected this, expected that the galaxy would resist change. But what she hadn't expected was the human's resolve. He didn't falter. He took every blow, every accusation, and stood firm. His focus never wavered. She had thought herself alone in this, but now, for the first time, she realized that someone else was willing to fight for her. And not just for her, but for the truth. Things escalated further when the factions took more aggressive action. An assassination attempt was made on the human, a desperate move to silence him before he could sway too many minds. But they underestimated him. He had anticipated something like this and had taken precautions. The attempt failed, but it sent a clear message the opposition was growing desperate, and they wouldn't stop until he was silenced. The human knew it was time to act. The final step of the plan was risky, but it was the only way to break through the fear and lies. He had arranged a meeting with several key figures from across the galaxy, a live broadcast that would reach millions. It would be the moment to reveal everything, to show the galaxy the truth about the alien woman, once and for all. The day of the broadcast arrived. The alien woman stood by the human's side, her glowing eyes steady, though inside she was bracing for what might come. She had spent so long in isolation, so long being feared, that part of her still doubted whether this would work. But as she looked at the human, standing tall and unshaken, she felt that spark of hope again. He believed in her. That was enough. The broadcast began. The human spoke first, addressing the galaxy directly, his voice calm and commanding. He laid out the truth, her past, her powers, the misunderstandings that had led to her exile. He spoke of her restraint, of her choice not to destroy, despite having the power to do so. And then he presented evidence, testimonies from those who had known her, documents that had been buried for years, revealing the truth about the war and her role in it. There was a tense silence as the galaxy listened, the weight of the truth sinking in. But then, as the human finished speaking, the opposition made their move. They had been waiting for this moment, and now they would strike. A representative from one of the most powerful factions appeared on the broadcast, accusing the human of being under her control, of manipulating the galaxy with lies. They demanded that she be destroyed once and for all, to ensure the safety of the galaxy. For a brief moment, the tension was unbearable. The alien woman could feel the familiar weight of fear creeping in. But then the human stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You're wrong," he said, his voice steady. "You're afraid of what you don't understand. You think she's a threat because you can't control her. But the real threat is fear that keeps us from seeing the truth." The words hung in the air, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, voices began to rise, supporters of the human, those who had listened and understood. The tide was turning. The alien woman felt something shift within her. It was hope, stronger than before. The galaxy wasn't rejecting her. They were beginning to see her for who she really was. In the days that followed, the opposition tried to push back, but the momentum had shifted. The human's words, and the truth he had revealed, spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The alien woman was no longer seen as a monster, but as a misunderstood figure, a victim of fear and ignorance. Slowly, the galaxy began to accept her. As the human prepared to leave, his mission complete, the alien woman stood beside him, no longer the isolated figure she had once been. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with a gratitude she hadn't felt in years. He smiled, that same calm, confident smile. "You didn't need me to save you. You just needed someone to remind the galaxy who you really are." With that, he turned and left, his mission accomplished, leaving behind a galaxy that had finally begun to understand what it had feared for so long.